All these considerations might be thought interesting primarily to Manchukuo and Japan, were it not for the peculiar frontier position of Manchukuo and crucial importance of Mongol part of that frontier. In its larger aspect, establishment of Manchukuo means a new chapter in the history of East Asia, a new chapter, however, in continuation of an old chronicle. It casts back to 2000 years in which tides of Chinese history were set and controlled by the frontier of Great Wall before brief interlude of Western Sea barbarians. The problem would be comparatively simple if Japan alone were dominating the continental power balance in sea power of Western world represented by America and members of League nation. There is, however, inevitable opposition between Japan and Russia. It's probably absurd to say that either Japan or Russia wants a war. The real question is whether war can be avoided. If it can't be avoided, then either nation may want war, in the sense of preferring the fight at a time convenient for itself and awkward for its positions. In the event of war between Russia and Japan, the strategic capacities of Siberian Manchukuo frontier are reasonably well known in both nations. Railway mileages are known, number of troops that each nation could bring into action, and the time it would take to get them into action can be calculated without gross inaccuracy. It's obvious that Japan must have taken into account the possibilities of Russian air offensive based on Vladivostok and directed against Osaka and Tokyo. And that something must have been done in the way of preparation to discount the effectiveness of such an attack. It is ridiculous, on the other hand, to assume that Japan could dispose of Russia by occupying Vladivostok and wartime province of Siberia. In fact, a frontal defeat of either nation would only mean to straight line withdrawal. It would not radically change their basic relationship. That after all, it's why Russia-Japanese war in 1904 and 5 was indecisive. It was only the first round. Only flank which either nation could turn by a sweeping and decisive movement is Outer Mongolian flank of Siberia or Inner Mongolian flank of Manchukuo. The problem of Vladivostok and Usuri-Amur frontier are local and tactical. The problem of Mongolia is one which allows room for strategy. The terrain is open. Trans-Siberian Railway flanks it, and railways of Manchukuo point the strait. At it, the scope of movement covers many hundreds of miles. Mongolia, therefore, of which the world knows less than it knows of China, Siberia or Manchukuo is the key to destiny of the whole Far East. There are certainly not more than 5 million Mongols are all told. Of this, about 1 million are in Outer Mongolia, occupying a territory as large as United States east of the Mississippi. About 1 million are in the part of Inner Mongolia, lying north of Sichuan and Halong. About 2 million are in Gyeongbuk province of Manchukuo, in a territory of roughly 100,000 square miles, about half size of France. Perhaps 1 million more are scattered through the Chinese Turkestan, Ukhnur province, Tibet, Buryat Republic of Siberia, and far away in Astrakhan region on the Lower Volga in Russia. Thus, there are actually about twice as many Mongols in Manchukuo as there are in Outer Mongolia. The weakness of Mongols as a scattered people of limited economic development in an enormous territory nearly as large as the United States. In all is obvious. Their strategic position, however, is remarkably strong. So strong that in the event of war between Russia and Japan, they might be vigorous action on behalf of the one nation or another, be able to influence the result, perhaps decisively. Manchukuo hold about half Inner Mongolia, consisting of Bark, western part of Harmorun province, the part of Nonni Valley, Jirimlik, covering practically all from Tian province of West Shanghai-Guang, Mukding Railway, and part of Heilongjiang and Ging as well. And Jost and Zhoot leagues in Jehe province. About two-thirds of Jirimlik, all of Jost League, and half of Zhoot League have been thickly settled by Chinese and haven't been included into estimated 100,000 square miles of Xinjiang province. Chinese Inner Mongolia, as it may now be called, it's about as large as Manchurian Mongolia. It is divided between the province of Sakhalin and Zhejiang. Inclusion within the Chinese provincial system being designed to hasten colonization and obliteration of Mongols. This Mongol territories consisted originally of 3 leagues of Shilingol, Ulanzhou, and Ordos, Ichzhou, together with Sakhars and Zhejiang tumults. Alsha and its Nigol, which are contiguous to Inner Mongolia on the west and politically are now affected by the same conditions, belong historically to Western or Central Asian Mongolia. Of these territories, Takhar Mongol country in the south of Takhar province and extending westward into Zhejiang province has been 70% colonized. The Tumut country, adjacent to the city of Guihua in Zhejiang province, has been almost wholly colonized. All the best land in Ordos and west of Zhejiang province has been colonized. About 30% of the land in Ulanzhou League in the north of Zhejiang province has been colonized. The Shilingol territory, a long strip in the north of Sakhar province, bordered on the north by Outer Mongolia and on the east by Hengam province, is the only region in Chinese Inner Mongolia that has entirely escaped colonization. The Mongols of the 10 banners of Shilingol are therefore the backbone of present movement of resistance against Chinese aggression. It can thus be seen how creation of Hengam province in Manchukuo has tightened up all the latent tension in Mongolia. Until the Japanese intervention of 1931, 2 main forces were at work among the Mongols. In Outer Mongolia, a Mongol nation was being built under strong Russian influence, but none of the less nationalistic in character. Throughout Inner Mongolia, the Chinese were encroaching and the Mongols were being wiped out. The princes were supported by Chinese authorities and were encouraged to assume absolute power, powers a good deal greater than those who had exercised under the old, pure Mongol tradition, in the domains that were left to them, but at the same time they were forced to yield fresh grants of land to Chinese every year. This deprived the Mongols of their natural leaders and faced them with the bitter choice of extinction if they remained under Chinese domination, as against combined rebellion and social revolution if they should attempt to break away. The princes, as a class, were necessarily opposed to union with Outer Mongolia because it would have meant that many of them would have been killed and the rest deprived of all their powers and revenue. By the creation of Hengam province, however, a fresh alternative was made possible. Since Mongols of Manchukuo have been given regional autonomy with a status which approximates to alliance with Japanese, provinces have been able to assume once more the position of natural leader of their people. In a movement which may yet restore unity and nationality to Mongols, the princes, therefore, are no longer defeatists, by the necessity of their position, and Inner Mongolia has emerged into open and dangerous rivalry with Outer Mongolia. The choice before Mongols as a whole is between revolutionary nationalism in association with Russia and conservative nationalism in association with Japan, but led by their own prince, descendants of Holy House of Genghis, and fortify their own religion, which, as part of their old feudal system, has suffered heavily in Outer Mongolia. The regions of Inner Mongolia, still under Chinese overlordship, have responded promptly to new hope. The most active leader has been a prince of West Sunit, Nshilingotlik, who has been referred to in news dispatched under the Chinese name in title of De Wang, Demchik Domro Wang. He stands for new feeling that the Mongols of Inner Mongolia, if they are determined enough, may now win independence and safety. He stands also for feeling not yet obvious to outer world that a general restoration is at hand which may sweep away from Inner Mongolia into Outer Mongolia. The symbol of this feeling was coronation of Puyi as a monarchical ruler of Manchukuo. The status of Puyi as a chief executive was undoubtedly felt by all people of Manchukuo, but especially by Mongols to be ambitious. A chief executive in a quasi-civil service position could be much easily removed if it were decided to annex Manchukuo to Japan. Coronation of sovereign commits Japan much more definitely to maintenance of independence of Manchukuo. There is no analogy here between Manchukuo and Korea because Korean sovereign who was deposed by Japan hadn't been created by Japan. For Mongols, especially the recognition of legitimist heir of Manchu emperors as sovereign of Manchukuo is significant. Mongols had never looked on Manchu emperors as alien conquerors, the Manchurian Mongols in particular, because they had been allies of Manchus even before Manchu conquest of China, felt that they were equals of Manchus as founders of Manchu Empire. However, a Manchu emperor, or a Zheng to use Mongol term, is better focus of unity among Mongols than any Mongol candidate could be. Mongol ruling princes are all descendants of different sons or brothers of Genghis Khan, or in case of Harchin Prince Injehe of his daughter. There is no convincing reason why one of them should be made supreme or the others. Original recognition of Manchu emperor as overlords of Mongols was largely the result of negotiations to end the fighting among different descendants of the heirs of Genghis, and consequently the heir of Manchu line is still regarded by conservative Mongols as the natural emperor of Mongols. The autonomy movement in Chinese Inner Mongolia represents, as might be expected, an effort to find out in the first place whether better terms can be obtained from China than from Manchukuo. The Nanjing government appears to be willing to guarantee immunity from further colonization and even from provincial supervision. The Chinese border provinces, however, object strongly to generous policy toward the Mongols. Formerly, Mongol affairs were supervised by a central bureau in national government at Nanjing, but at the same time were dealt with by local authorities of provinces among which Mongol territories had been divided. The result was that Chinese pressure on Mongols remained constant, while Mongols' demand for negotiations were shuttled back and forth between provincial governments and central governments without ever being fairly answered. The Mongols now demand the right to go over the heads of provincial authorities and to deal directly. And finally, with Nanjing. Obviously, however, such late and unwilling concessions by the Chinese, even if they are granted in full, are now no permanent solution for Mongol questions. They merely enable the Mongol leaders to take a little more time in which to work out the policy toward Manchukuo and Outer Mongolia. It's also plain enough that from a point of view of Manchukuo, it would be better not to instigate a rising in Chinese Inner Mongolia, but to come to support of rising which Mongols themselves had begun. If Mongols were rebel outright against China, they would have to appeal to Manchukuo for support. From the point of view of Mongols, however, it would be better to make Manchukuo commit itself first by supplying arms and offering open support. This would be a guarantee that Mongols were not being used simply to bring bargaining pressure on China and would commit Japan and Manchukuo to a permanent policy support for conservative Mongols under the terms favorable to Mongols themselves. These, however, are details and are unimportant in comparison with the fact that no Japanese continental policy can be complete without any active Mongol policy. Japan, having created the state of Manchukuo and given it a Mongol policy by setting aside the province of Hyanggang, can no longer avoid extending its interest into the western part of Inner Mongolia. If a Japanese forward policy in Inner Mongolia is inevitable, a clash between Inner and Outer Mongolia is no less inevitable. It is inherent in both of geographical and political conditions. Inner Mongolia encloses Outer Mongolia on the east and south. It offers to the railways and parts of Manchukuo a route for export of Outer Mongolian products, which in recent years have been monopolized by Siberia. The unification of Inner Mongolia again in association with Manchukuo will create a new Mongolian frontier so vulnerable for both Siberia and Manchukuo that it can't stand long without the test of strength. Above all, Mongols themselves are bound to look for war. All Mongols must think inevitably in terms of Mongol unification, and the ancient cleavage between Inner and Outer Mongolia doesn't alter this innate urge toward unity. Mongol Empire brought about a unification of Mongols based on Outer Mongolia. Manchu Empire also unified Mongols, but it began with Inner Mongolia. In modern phase, tribes of Inner Mongolia hung back because they had something to lose or as well as to gain. Socially and politically, unification meant submission to revolutionary government of Outer Mongolia. Now it is possible to think of unification in terms of counter-revolution in Outer Mongolia, leading to restoration of hereditary prince and Lama church and old tradition. While government of Outer Mongolia is a strong one and has provided its ability to rule without the support of Russian troops, it's undeniably a minority government, and its ability to prevent counter-revolution rests undeniably on the supply of Russian arms. Its leaders are probably the peak of nations, but they won't present a national majority until the generation which remembers the old days and old ways dies out and is replaced by one which has grown up entirely under the new order. Anti-revolutionary Mongol leaders are aware of this. They know that if counter-revolution is to be successful, it must begin while the men of older generation are still vigorous. Many of them believe that it wouldn't require a large army to win Outer Mongolia to new movements of conservative nationalism. That it would be necessary only to supply arms and leadership. Thus, the first time since Outer Mongolian independence became effective, Outer Mongolia has more to gain by temporizing and evasion, and in Inner Mongolia more to gain by decisive action. It is impossible for a friend of Mongols to consider the almost certain prospect of Mongol civil war without pity and regret. Undoubtedly, the peak of Mongol nations today are young intellectuals who believe that the successful revival of Mongols can't be achieved by patching up the old order, that it demands the liquidation of hereditary princes and at least through the reforms of Lama Church. These leaders of younger men are to be found throughout Inner Mongolia as well as in Outer Mongolia. On the other hand, the conservative leaders of princes and high lamas are most of them honest and patriotic men, and some of them are very able. Their trouble is that they are born out of time, the old tradition is now decayed, and it would be hard, though it may be possible, to make it clean and strong again in a time to lead the nation as tribal feeling believes that it should. Its great disadvantage is the bad repute that it has among the younger men, because they know that the princely class in recent years has one of the who set its class interests above the national interests. Although it fell to the despair, and because of feeling that even good leadership was hopeless, much more than through the dishonesty. Another disadvantage is the inevitable opposition of conservatives to education and reform, because the fear of that progressiveness will mean revolutionary ideas. As the matter now stands, the initiative lies with Japan rather than with Russia. Whole Russian policy is necessarily defensive in order to gain time, while the young, truly Sovietized generation matures, and the economic sign views of nation are strengthened. It's easy enough to suggest alternatives of disaster. Japan, for instance, may not be a good position to make a frontal attack on Russia, but it might be good policy to start a tribal war in Mongolia and to follow it if there seemed a good chance of bringing Outer Mongolia under Japanese control. If that were accomplished, in fact, there would be no need for Japan to force war on Russia, for whole of Siberia and Trans-Siberian Railway would be outflanked. But could Russia let Mongolian events go so far without intervening? The most imminent danger is that Japan and Russia, even if they both wish to avoid war, may be drawn into war through the Mongolia. Japan can't afford not to organize and support Mongols who are within Manchuria, and this necessarily involves Japan into affairs of all Mongols. Nor can Russia afford not to support Outer Mongolia, while, however, both Russia and Japan wish to stop short of war. General trend of events among Mongols themselves makes for war. There is no telling when or how or what frontier a tribal war may start in Mongolia. Still less can it be foreseen how far that war might spread. The powers of the world may plan for peace, but Manchukuo was fashioned under the star of war. And the star shines now toward Mongolia. Empires in the end are masters of men who built them. You can't claim a great destiny and then refuse to follow it.